My family humiliated me for not helping with the bills and called me a parasite until they discovered my spoiled sisters were stealing all the money I sent. My parents made it clear from the start which daughter mattered. Not through words. Exactly. Though those came plenty. Through 1,000 small moments that added up to one unmistakable message. I wasn't the one they wanted. My 2 older sisters got the praise, the attention, the pride. When they came home for Sunday dinners, our parents transformed. Suddenly animated, asking detailed questions about their jobs, their weekends, their opinions on everything. My oldest sister sold pharmaceuticals and made enough to lease a luxury sedan. My other sister practiced corporate law, the kind where she billed $300 an hour and talked casually about cases worth millions. They were the success stories our parents told neighbors about, the daughters who made them proud. I was 29 and still living at home, working as an administrative assistant at a small accounting firm for $28,000 a year. Enough to cover my car payment, phone bill, and gas. Not enough to move out in a city where studio apartments started at $1,200 a month. During those family dinners, I sat at the same table eating the same food and somehow occupied less space than the furniture. My father would ask someone to pass the salt without looking in my direction, even though my hand was already extended toward the shaker. The invisibility wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was how they compared us out loud, casually, like commenting on the weather. "Your sisters both bought their own cars before they turned 25, my mother said once, watching me pull up in my 10-year-old sedan with the dented bumper. But I suppose everyone moves at their own pace. The words were almost kind if you didn't hear the tone underneath them, the one that made it crystal clear what pace she thought I was moving at. I tried offering help once when I was 26. Came home from work to find my father at the kitchen table going through bills, stress carved into every line of his face. He was adding numbers on a calculator, muttering under his breath about utility costs. My mother sat across from him looking equally tense, both of them surrounded by envelopes and statements. "Hey," I said, approaching carefully. "I got a small raise last month. I could contribute $75 toward utilities if that would help." He looked up at me slowly. The expression on his face wasn't gratitude or even acknowledgement of the gesture. It was something closer to disgust mixed with pity, like I'd offered him pocket change when he needed thousands. "You can barely support yourself," he said flatly. "Don't pretend you can help us. You need every penny you earn just to stay afloat." My mother nodded her agreement without ever meeting my eyes. She just went back to sorting through bills as if I'd already left the room. The message couldn't have been clearer. Even my attempts to contribute were worthless. I was the incompetent daughter who had nothing real to offer, and offering that nothing was somehow more insulting than staying silent. My sisters weren't cruel to me, not directly. Not when we were alone. Anyway, they texted occasionally, sent memes, included me in family group chats about birthdays and holidays. We grabbed lunch together when they visited, and during those moments they seemed like actual sisters, like people who genuinely cared about me. My oldest sister would ask about my job, and my other sister would share funny stories from her law firm. In those brief windows, I could almost forget how things were the rest of the time. But around our parents, the dynamic shifted completely. They absorbed all the light in the room while I faded into shadows. It wasn't malicious exactly, just natural, like water flowing downhill. The attention went where it always went, and I had long since learned to expect nothing else. They were 6 and 8 years older than me, already established in careers with retirement accounts and investment portfolios, while I was still figuring out how to save more than $100 a month. I told myself it was natural for them to be ahead. They had a head start, more time to build their lives, better opportunities. I told myself a lot of comforting lies back then. Everything changed on a random Tuesday in March. I was sitting at my desk organizing expense reports for one of the senior accountants, trying to decode receipts that had been shoved into an envelope with absolutely no explanation or organization. My boss, the office manager named Mrs. Patterson, walked past my cubicle, then backtracked and stopped. "Can you come to my office for a minute?" she asked, her tone neutral but serious. My stomach dropped immediately. That request, that tone, usually meant bad news. Maybe I'd messed up something important. Maybe they were downsizing and I was first on the list. Maybe this was finally it, the moment I'd lose even this mediocre job and have to explain to my parents why I'd failed yet again. I followed her down the hallway on legs that felt unsteady, mentally running through every possible mistake I might have made in the past month. She closed the door behind me and gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit down," she said, but she was smiling. That confused me completely. People don't smile when they're about to fire you, do they? I've been watching your work for the past year, she continued, leaning back in her chair. You catch errors that other people miss entirely. You turn chaos into organized systems. You solve problems before they become emergencies. You're the only person in this office who can make sense of what the senior partners consider adequate documentation. She said those last words with air quotes and a slight eye roll. I sat there genuinely not understanding where this conversation was heading. Was this some kind of prelude to criticism? The classic, "you're good, but not good enough" speech? We're opening a new branch office 4 hours from here, she said. Different city, new team, complete startup situation. We need someone to run operations there. Coordinate between departments, manage logistics, handle all the day-to-day problems that come with launching something new. The position is operations coordinator. The salary is $52,000 a year, plus benefits, plus relocation assistance, plus a $3,000 signing bonus to help with moving costs. I blinked at her. My current salary was $28,000. She just offered me nearly double that. For a position with actual responsibility, actual authority, actual respect. This had to be some kind of mistake. I don't understand why you'd pick me for something like that, I said slowly. She smiled wider. Because you're better at this than you think you are. You've been told you're incompetent so many times by people who should know better that you actually believe it now. But I've worked with dozens of administrative assistants over 20 years, and you're genuinely talented at this work. You have instincts for workflow and problem solving that honestly can't be taught. This position needs someone exactly like you. Stop selling yourself short. I stared at the contract she slid across the desk. The numbers were printed right there in black ink, real and official. $52,000 annually, benefits including health insurance. Relocation assistance up to $5,000. A $3,000 signing bonus. It seemed impossible, like one of those scam emails promising wealth if you just click this suspicious link. Can I think about it? I managed to ask. Of course. Take a few days. But don't take too long, because if you say no, I'll have to start interviewing other candidates, and I really don't want to do that. You're my first choice for good reasons. That night, I sat in my small bedroom in my parents' house, staring at the contract I'd brought home. The room still had the same furniture from high school. The same posters I'd never bothered taking down. The same feeling of being frozen in time while everyone else moved forward. $52,000 a year. A title that wasn't just assistant. My own apartment in a new city where nobody knew me as the family disappointment. A fresh start. It seemed too good to be true. I called my older sister first. She answered on the third ring, sounding distracted. Hey, what's up? I'm about to head into a client meeting in like 10 minutes. I got a job offer, I blurted out. In another city. Big promotion. I don't know if I should take it. Wait, hold on. I heard her saying something muffled to someone else. Then the sound of a door closing. Okay, I'm alone now. Tell me everything. I explained the offer, the salary jump, the position, the relocation to a city 4 hours away. She was silent for a moment after I finished. Are you kidding me right now? She finally said. This is amazing. This is exactly what you need. A fresh start, real money, away from this house, away from... She trailed off, but I knew exactly what she meant. Away from our parents and their constant comparisons and their endless disappointment. But what if I'm not actually good enough? I asked. What if they figure out I'm not qualified and I fail? Then you'll fail in a new city making twice your current salary with your own apartment, she said pragmatically. Which is still better than staying where you are now. Take the job. Seriously, take it and don't look back. I called my other sister next. She was more emotional about it, her voice rising with excitement. Oh my God, yes, you absolutely have to take this. Do you know how huge this opportunity is? Do you realize what kind of career jump this represents? She kept talking, barely pausing for breath, listing all the reasons I should accept immediately. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and for the first time, I started to actually believe maybe I could do this. My sisters, for all the favoritism they received and all the success they'd achieved, had never been unsupportive of me personally. They encouraged me, cheered me on, treated me like I had genuine potential. It was only around our parents that everything shifted, that they basked in approval while I withered from lack of it. But in moments like this, talking to them individually, they were good sisters. I accepted the position 3 days later. The next 2 weeks were a blur of paperwork, apartment hunting on rental websites, packing up my limited belongings, and carefully avoiding my parents as much as possible while still living under their roof. When I finally told them I was moving, my father grunted and went back to reading his newspaper. My mother said, "Well, don't come crying back here when it doesn't work out. Not congratulations. Not pride. Not even basic acknowledgement that this was a significant career advancement. Just the same assumption of my inevitable failure." The day I moved, I loaded everything I owned into my sedan. It all fit easily, which was depressing in its own way. 29 years of life packed into a car. My parents didn't come out to say goodbye. I drove away from that house watching it shrink in my rearview mirror and felt nothing except pure relief. The new apartment was small but entirely mine. The signing bonus covered my first month's rent and a used couch I found online. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with actual counter space, a living room with windows that let in morning sunlight. I'd never lived alone before, had never had a space that was completely under my control. The first night, I sat on the floor surrounded by unpacked boxes and cried. Not sad tears exactly. More like a release, like something that had been compressed inside me for decades was finally expanding, taking up space, breathing freely. The work turned out to be exactly what Mrs. Patterson had described. Challenging but rewarding in ways I hadn't experienced before. My instincts for organization and problem-solving that had gone mostly unnoticed in my old position suddenly mattered. I could look at a chaotic situation and see the underlying structure, identify potential problems before they became actual crises, create systems that made everything run more smoothly. Within my first month, I'd reorganized the entire filing system using a color-coded method that cut retrieval time in half. I'd streamlined the expense report process so thoroughly that the senior partners actually thanked me personally. I'd set up a communication protocol between departments that reduced unnecessary meetings by 40%. People listened when I made suggestions. Coworkers treated me like someone whose opinion had value. My new supervisor, a man named Tom who'd been with the company 15 years, pulled me aside after about 6 weeks. "You're doing great work," he said. "Really impressive for someone new to this level of responsibility. Keep it up, and you'll go far here." That validation meant more than he probably realized. I went home that evening and looked at my bank account. After rent, utilities, groceries, and all my basic expenses, I had money left over. Real money. More than I'd ever managed to save before. I could breathe financially for the first time in my adult life. 3 months into the position, Tom approached me again after a particularly successful project launch. "I'm putting in for a raise for you," he said. "You're worth more than what we're paying. It won't be huge because you haven't been here long, but it'll be substantial. Should show up in your next paycheck cycle." 6 weeks later, my salary jumped to $58,000. Mrs. Patterson called to congratulate me. "Told you that you were talented," she said warmly before hanging up. 6,000 more annually, 500 more monthly. Recognition that I was actually good at this work, that I deserved to be compensated accordingly. I'd never felt so valued professionally. That's when the idea formed, slowly at first, then with increasing clarity. I had money now, real money with actual savings building up each month. I could help my parents in ways that would make a genuine difference in their lives. $1,500 monthly wouldn't even strain my budget significantly, and it could transform theirs. Cover utilities completely. Help with groceries, give them breathing room from the constant financial stress I'd watched them struggle with my entire life. But there was a fundamental problem I couldn't ignore. They'd never accept help directly from me. The pattern was established over years. When I'd tried before with much smaller amounts, they'd rejected me with disdain, pride, prejudice, whatever you wanted to call it. The result would be the same. They would refuse money from the daughter they considered worthless. Or they'd accept it with such resentment, it would make our relationship even worse. I spent 2 weeks thinking about this problem, turning it over in my mind during my commute, while cooking dinner in my small kitchen, while lying in bed trying to fall asleep. And then the solution came to me, simple and obvious once I saw it. I wouldn't send money directly. I'd send it through my sisters, and they'd present it to our parents as a joint contribution from all 3 daughters. That way, our parents would accept it without question. They'd be proud that all their daughters were helping them together, and I could finally contribute to my family in a meaningful way, even if they never knew the money came primarily from me. The idea felt slightly dishonest at first, like I was manipulating the situation. But the more I considered it, the more sense it made. My parents genuinely needed financial help. I had the means to provide that help. The only barrier was their prejudice against me personally, and this solution bypassed that barrier completely. Everyone would benefit. My parents would have financial relief, my sisters would look generous without actually sacrificing anything, and I'd finally be able to support my family. It felt like the perfect solution. I called my older sister on a Saturday morning when I knew she'd be free. She was at a coffee shop. I could hear the background noise of conversations and the hiss of espresso machines. "Hey," I said. "I wanted to ask you something kind of unusual." "Shoot," she said, sounding curious. I explained my plan carefully. I would send her money every month, substantial money, and she would pass it along to our parents as if it was coming from both of us, or better yet, from all three sisters collectively. "I know it sounds weird," I said, "but you know exactly how they are about me. They'll never accept help directly from me no matter how much I'm making now. But if it seems like it's from all of us together, they won't question it." She was quiet for a moment, and I worried she'd think the whole idea was crazy. But then she said, "That's actually really sweet of you. And honestly, yeah, they would never accept it from just you. Not because you don't deserve their gratitude, but because they're stubborn and set in their ways about you. If you want to help them this way, I'll definitely pass it along." That's a really generous thing to do, especially after everything. Relief washed over me. "Thank you. I'll start sending you money next month, probably around $1,500. Just give it to them however you think is best. Tell them it's from all of us. You're a better person than they deserve," she said. Honestly. 2 days later, I called my other sister with the same request. I explained the plan, the reasoning behind it, the whole setup. She agreed even more enthusiastically than our older sister. "Of course I'll help with this," she said. "And you're absolutely right that they'd reject it if they knew it was from you. This way they actually get the help they need without their stupid pride getting in the way. You're being really generous, especially after how they've treated you your entire life." I felt validated by their responses, reassured that I was doing something genuinely good. My sisters understood the family dynamics, understood our parents' stubborn prejudices, and they were willing to help me help them. It felt like we were all finally on the same team, working together toward a common goal. For the first time, I felt like part of the family success story instead of standing outside it looking in. The first transfer went out at the beginning of April. $1,500 sent directly to my older sister's account with a note attached. "For Mom and Dad, please tell them it's from all three of us." She confirmed receipt within an hour and sent back a message saying she'd drop it off to them that weekend when she visited for Sunday dinner. The second transfer went to my other sister in May. Same amount, same instructions, same confirmation that she'd received it and would pass it along. By June, I'd established a comfortable rhythm, alternating between my sisters each month so neither one felt burdened by constant transfers. $1,500 monthly, building up quickly to substantial amounts. I tried checking in when I called home, which I did maybe once every 2 weeks. "How are things going?" I'd ask my mother. "Everything okay with bills and expenses?" She'd respond vaguely, always changing the subject almost immediately. "We're fine. How's your new job going?" The conversations were brief and superficial, rarely lasting more than 5 or 10 minutes. I told myself that was just their way. Maybe they felt embarrassed about accepting help from their daughters. Maybe they didn't want to acknowledge they needed assistance. I interpreted their discomfort and evasiveness as pride, as the kind of shame people feel when they have to rely on others. Meanwhile, something interesting started happening on social media. My older sister, who'd always posted occasionally, began sharing photos from expensive restaurants. Not just nice places, but the kind of upscale establishments where appetizers cost $35 and entrees start at $50. She posted pictures of beautifully plated meals that looked like they belonged in culinary magazines, clearly expensive and clearly frequent. My other sister posted about buying a new car in July. Not used, not economy. A really nice car, the kind with leather seats and a premium sound system and all the modern safety features. She shared multiple photos of herself standing next to it looking absolutely thrilled, talking in the caption about how hard she'd worked to afford it and how proud she was of this purchase. Both of them started taking weekend trips with increasing frequency. My oldest sister went to a beach resort in August, then a mountain cabin rental in September. My other sister posted photos from a spa weekend, then a wine country tour, then a concert in a city 2 states away. They were going out more, doing more, buying more. Their social media lives looked increasingly luxurious and carefree. I felt genuinely happy for them when I saw these posts. Clearly, they were both doing really well in their careers. Maybe they'd gotten significant raises or bonuses or promotions I didn't know about. It was nice seeing them thrive. It felt like proof that our family's overall luck was turning around, that we were all finally succeeding in our own ways. They were doing well, I was doing well, and our parents were getting the financial help they needed from all three of us. Everything seemed to be falling into perfectly place. Not once, not even for a second, did it occur to me to question the timing. My sister's dramatic lifestyle upgrade had started in April, the exact same month I began sending money. That correlation should have been blindingly obvious, should have set off immediate alarm bells. But I was too trusting, too eager to believe the best of people I loved, too desperate to think that my family was finally all succeeding together. When you want to believe something badly enough, you can ignore an enormous number of red flags waving directly in front of your face. 6 months into this arrangement, in early October, I decided to visit home. No particular reason, no special occasion or holiday coming up. I just felt like it was time to see everyone in person, to check on how things were actually going beyond brief phone calls. I didn't announce it ahead of time because part of me liked the idea of surprising them, of seeing their genuine reactions before they had time to prepare or put on any kind of show. The drive took 4 hours through increasingly familiar landscape. Somewhere along the route, maybe halfway there, I called my mother on impulse. We chatted about completely surface-level things. My work schedule, the weather, nothing particularly meaningful or deep. And then, without really planning to say it, I mentioned casually, "I hope the financial help we've been sending has been making things easier for you guys." There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long, uncomfortable pause that made me check my phone screen to see if the call had somehow dropped. "What help?" my mother finally asked, her voice strange and uncertain. "You know," I said, confused by her confusion. The money we've all been sending you every month." "Oh," she said. But the word came out tentative, almost questioning. "Right, yes, that's been helpful." But her tone was completely wrong. She sounded like someone who'd been caught off guard by an unexpected question, someone trying to piece together what I was talking about while pretending to already know. "I'm getting some static on the line. I should let you go," she said abruptly, and hung up before I could respond. I held the phone staring at it for a moment, trying to make sense of that bizarre interaction. She'd sounded genuinely confused when I first mentioned the help, like she had no idea what I was referring to. But then she'd recovered quickly, acknowledged it vaguely, and ended the call. Maybe I'd misread her tone. Maybe she was distracted or dealing with something else when I called. I shook off the weird feeling and kept driving. When I reached their neighborhood, old habits kicked in, and I drove past the house before consciously deciding to. I pulled up across the street and just sat there for a moment, looking at the place where I'd grown up. It looked exactly the same as when I'd left 6 months earlier. Exactly the same as it had looked for years, actually. Same peeling paint on the window shutters that my father had been saying he'd fix for at least a decade. Same cracked concrete steps leading to the front door, the third one from the bottom with a chunk missing in the corner. Same weathered mailbox listing slightly to one side. Same old furniture visible through the front window. A sinking sensation started forming in my stomach. $1,500 a month for 6 months was $9,000 total. $9,000 should have made some kind of visible difference, shouldn't it? Even if they were using every penny for bills and not for repairs or upgrades. Shouldn't there be some sign of financial relief? Some indication that their situation had improved? Maybe the stress wouldn't be visible from outside. But I'd expected something. Anything to be different. My father's car was parked in the driveway. The same decade-old sedan he'd been driving since before I graduated high school. I grabbed my overnight bag from the passenger seat and walked to the front door, that sinking feeling getting heavier with each step. Something felt off, though I couldn't articulate exactly what. The air felt charged somehow, like the pressure before a storm. I knocked rather than using my old key, which felt strange but also appropriate somehow. I heard footsteps approaching from inside. Then the door opened. My mother stood there, and her expression when she saw me wasn't surprise or joy or even neutral acknowledgement. It was discomfort. Clear, unmistakable discomfort. Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed, and her mouth pressed into a thin line. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Not rudely exactly, but not warmly either. More like I was an unexpected salesperson interrupting her Saturday afternoon. "Just thought I'd visit," I said, trying to keep my voice light and casual despite the obvious tension. "Surprise." She stood in the doorway for several seconds too long, as if seriously considering whether to let me in at all. Then she stepped back reluctantly, holding the door open just enough for me to enter. "Your father's watching television," she said, as if that explained something or provided some kind of warning. I walked inside, and immediately that familiar smell hit me. That specific combination of old carpet, my mother's cooking that always involved too much garlic, and the faint mustiness that comes from windows that are never opened. Nothing had changed. Not just nothing major. Nothing at all. Same worn couch with the permanent indentation where my father had sat for thousands of hours. Same faded curtains that had been there since I was in middle school. Same outdated kitchen table visible through the doorway, with the scratched surface and one leg that was slightly shorter than the others. Same everything. My father sat in his chair, remote control in hand, eyes fixed on the television screen. Some home improvement show was playing, the volume louder than necessary. He glanced at me briefly when I walked in his line of sight, gave a single nod of acknowledgement, and immediately returned his attention to the television. Not, "Hello, how are you?" Not, "This is a surprise." Not, "Good to see you." Just bare minimum acknowledgement that I had entered his field of vision and was now being dismissed from it. I sat down on the other end of the couch, the end nobody ever sat in because it was closest to the door and caught the worst of the draft in winter. My mother remained standing with her arms crossed, body language screaming that she desperately wished I wasn't there. The atmosphere was so thick with tension you could practically see it. I tried starting a conversation, asking about their health, whether anything new had happened recently, how the neighbors were doing. My mother answered in the shortest sentences possible. "Fine. Not really. They're okay." Each response came with the clear implication that she wanted this interaction to end as quickly as possible. My father didn't answer at all, just kept his eyes glued to the television like I wasn't even in the room. I had expected some level of awkwardness, some distance given how our relationship had always been. But this was different. This was active, almost aggressive discomfort, like my presence was physically painful to them. 20 minutes of this excruciating tension passed. 20 minutes of me trying to make conversation and repeatedly hitting a solid wall of resistance. 20 minutes of feeling like an unwelcome intruder in the house where I'd grown up. And then my father finally spoke more than 2 words, still without looking away from the television screen. "You know what your problem is?" he said, his voice flat and cold. Here we go, I thought. The same old script we'd been running for 30 years. "What's that?" I asked, already tired of a conversation that hadn't fully started yet. "You're a disgrace to this family. Always have been. Always will be." The words shouldn't have hurt anymore. I'd heard variations of this assessment my entire life. But somehow, sitting there after 6 months of sending them substantial money while believing I was finally contributing something meaningful, hearing it again felt like being slapped across the face. "That's not fair," I started to say. But my mother cut me off before I could continue. "Not fair?" Her voice rose sharply, all that pent-up discomfort suddenly transforming into open anger. "You want to talk about what's fair? You moved away 6 months ago, abandoned your family without a second thought, and you've never once offered to help us with anything. Your sisters? They're responsible adults who understand what family means. They send us money every single month to help with bills. But you only think about yourself. You've always only thought about yourself." I sat there stunned into complete silence. My father continued, his voice getting progressively louder and more aggressive. "Your sisters understand what it means to be part of a family. They sacrifice to make sure we're taken care of financially. They're real daughters who actually give back after everything we did for them. But you've done nothing but take your whole life and given absolutely nothing back. You're selfish, you're irresponsible, and you're completely ungrateful for everything we sacrificed to raise you." The accusations kept coming, piling on top of each other faster than I could process them. They called me every possible variation of disappointing they could think of. Worthless, self-centered, uncaring, cold. They compared me directly and extensively to my sisters, holding them up as perfect examples of filial devotion and responsibility, while painting me as the ungrateful child who had contributed nothing, who had abandoned them the first chance I got, who only cared about her own life and success and comfort. And something in me snapped. Not with anger exactly, more like sudden crystalline clarity, all the pieces clicking into place at once. "Wait," I said, cutting through their ongoing tirade. "What about the money I've been sending you every single month for the past 6 months?" They both stopped mid-sentence. My father finally looked away from the television, turning to stare at me with genuine confusion written across his face. "What money?" he asked. "The money I've been sending," I said slowly and clearly, enunciating each word. $1,500. Every single month since April. $9,000 total. My mother shook her head, her expression shifting from anger to complete puzzlement. "We haven't received any money from you. We never receive anything from you. Your sisters are the only ones who help us financially. They send what they can each month. We know they have their own bills too, so we don't expect much. But at least they try." "That's impossible," I said. already pulling out my phone with hands that had started shaking. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I've been sending it through them. They were supposed to give it to you as a contribution from all three of us together. The front door opened at that exact moment. The timing was so impossibly perfect, it felt like something from a badly written movie. Both my sisters walked in together, clearly planning their usual Sunday-a-day early visit. They were laughing about something, my other sister saying something about traffic being terrible on the highway, both of them in good moods. And then they saw me sitting there on the couch. They saw the phone in my hand. They saw our parents' confused and angry faces. And I watched the color drain from both their faces instantly, watched them go from relaxed and happy to absolutely terrified in the space of a single second. That's when I knew with complete certainty. In that single moment, watching them freeze in the doorway like deer in headlights, watching the panic flood into their eyes, I knew exactly what had happened. I knew where my money had gone. I knew why our parents' house looked the same. I knew why my sisters' lifestyles had suddenly upgraded. I knew everything. "Show them," I said, my voice coming out hollow and distant like it was someone else speaking. I pulled up my banking app, found my transaction history, and turned the phone screen toward our parents. "Here, look, every single transfer. $1,500 sent each month, alternating between both of them. April through September. $9,000 total." My mother took the phone from me with hands that were visibly shaking. She scrolled through the transactions, her face growing paler with each swipe of her finger. My father leaned over her shoulder to look at the screen, his confusion shifting rapidly to understanding and then to pure rage. My older sister opened her mouth to speak. I held up my hand, cutting her off before any words could come out. "Don't," I said quietly but firmly. "Just don't even try." But she did anyway, words rushing out in a panic. "Okay, yes, we took the money, but it's not what it looks like. It's not as bad as you think." "Really?" I asked, my voice still eerily calm. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you both stole $9,000 that was supposed to help our parents, and you've been lying to absolutely everyone about it for 6 months. So please, go ahead and explain to me how it's not what it looks like." My other sister stepped forward, and I noticed tears were already forming in her eyes. The tears made me angrier than anything else so far, crying like she was somehow the victim in this situation, like she had any right to be upset. "We didn't steal it," she said, voice breaking. "We just needed some of it too. I had credit card debt that was literally destroying me, and she needed a down payment for a car. We still gave them money every month. We didn't keep absolutely everything." "How much?" our father asked, his voice becoming dangerously quiet in a way I had never heard from him before. The kind of quiet that's actually more terrifying than yelling. My sisters looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them, some wordless negotiation about who should be the one to admit the truth. Finally, my older sister said in barely more than a whisper, "About $50 a month, sometimes $100 if we could afford it." The silence that followed was absolutely complete. Even the television seemed to mute itself. Even the air seemed to stop moving. My mother was still holding my phone, staring at the screen like it might suddenly change what it was showing her if she looked long enough. "Let me make absolutely certain I understand this correctly," our father said, his voice getting progressively quieter with each word, which somehow made it infinitely more threatening. "Your sister, who you always told us was worthless and irresponsible, sent you $1,500 every single month, for 6 months, $9,000 total, and you gave us less than $100 a month out of that money? We were going to pay her back," my other sister said weakly, desperately, like this explanation would somehow make everything okay. "We just needed some time to get our finances together first." "When?" I asked, surprised by how completely calm my voice sounded despite the rage and betrayal burning through my entire body. "When exactly were you planning to pay me back? When were you planning to tell anyone about any of this? When were you going to mention to our parents that the money they thought was coming from your generous hearts was actually coming from me?" They had no answer to that. Of course they didn't, because there was no good answer, no explanation that could make this okay. The truth was completely obvious and impossible to avoid. They had never planned to tell anyone ever. They would have continued taking my money indefinitely, giving the absolute bare minimum to our parents, and accepting all the praise and gratitude and elevated status that rightfully belonged to me. "So you've been taking 90% of the money your sister sent," our mother said slowly, her voice shaking with what I realized was barely contained fury, "and pretending the tiny amount you gave us was from your own money and your own sacrifices?" making us believe you were being generous and responsible while you spent her money on fancy restaurants and new cars and vacation trips. My older sister started crying now too, real tears streaming down her face. "We needed it," she sobbed. "I have so much credit card debt you don't even understand. $20,000 that I can't get out from under." And it seemed like she had so much money now with her new job and her raise. We thought she wouldn't even miss it. We thought we were being smart, helping ourselves while still helping you a little bit too. "A little," I repeated flatly. "You thought giving our parents less than a tenth of what I sent you while keeping the rest for your own luxury lifestyle was acceptable?" "We're sorry," my other sister sobbed, makeup running down her face. "We'll pay you back every penny. We'll give them all the money we should have given them from the start. We'll make this right somehow. Please, we're so sorry." I stood up, suddenly exhausted beyond anything I'd ever felt. Exhausted down to my bones, down to my soul. I looked at my sisters, these women I had trusted completely and without question, who had encouraged me to take the job and move away, who had agreed so readily to help me help our parents, who had seemed like genuinely good sisters in all our one-on-one conversations. I looked at my parents who had spent 6 months heaping praise on my sisters for their supposed generosity, while treating me like absolute garbage, never once questioning where the money was actually coming from, or why their financial situation wasn't actually improving. "I don't want your money," I said to my sisters, each word deliberate and final. "And I don't want your apologies," I said to my parents. "What I want is to never have to deal with any of you ever again." My father stood up from his chair for the first time since I'd arrived. "Don't say that," he said. And for the first time in my entire life, I heard actual uncertainty in his voice instead of absolute conviction. "We didn't know any of this was happening. We had no idea they were lying to us. We need that money. We need your help. Don't do this." "You should have thought about that before," I said, walking toward the door. My sisters tried to physically step in front of me, reaching out like they could actually stop me from leaving. I walked around them without making contact. "You should have thought about it before you spent 30 years convincing me I was worthless. Before you believed your lying, thieving daughters over me without asking a single question. Before you threw everything I tried to do for you back in my face with contempt." They were all talking at once now, voices overlapping and rising. My father was saying something about not being hasty, about working this out like reasonable adults. My mother was crying, asking me to please stay and discuss this calmly. My sisters were both sobbing and making promises they had absolutely no ability or intention to keep. I walked through all of it, through the noise and the tears and the desperate pleas, opened the front door and stepped outside into the cool October air. Behind me, I could hear them calling my name, multiple voices shouting it, begging me to come back, to wait, to listen. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away from that house and those people without looking back even once. In my rearview mirror, I could see them standing in the driveway and the yard, still calling after me, getting progressively smaller and smaller until they disappeared completely when I turned the corner. I drove for maybe 20 minutes on pure autopilot before I had to pull over. Found an empty parking lot behind a closed grocery store, pulled in, put my head on the steering wheel, and just sat there. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry in the way I expected to be. I wasn't anything really, just completely empty. 30 years of trying to earn their love and approval. 6 months of sending substantial money while believing I was finally contributing something meaningful. All of it adding up to this one moment. Me, sitting alone in a parking lot behind a grocery store, finally understanding that I had never mattered to any of them at all. The drive back to my apartment took 4 hours, but I barely remember any of it. I was operating on complete autopilot, my mind cycling through the same thoughts over and over. When I finally got home, I went through my phone methodically and deliberately. Blocked my father's number, blocked my mother's number, blocked both sisters' numbers. One by one, I blocked all 4 of them on every social media platform, every messaging app, email, everything. I cut every single line of communication I could think of. If they wanted to grovel or explain or apologize or try to manipulate me further, they would have to do it to someone else because I was completely done. I kept expecting guilt to hit, kept waiting for that voice in my head to tell me I was being cruel or extreme or unforgiving, but it never came. Instead, I felt progressively lighter, like I'd been carrying an enormous weight my entire life and had finally set it down and walked away from it. The next day was Monday, and I went to work exactly like normal. My colleagues asked casually about my weekend. "It was fine," I said, my voice steady and calm, uneventful. And in a strange way, that was actually true. I had just permanently removed 4 toxic people from my life. That wasn't an event. That was progress. My sisters tried calling over the next week from different numbers they must have borrowed from friends. My mother tried using what I assumed was a neighbor's phone based on the unfamiliar area code. Every unknown number that called me went straight to voicemail and I never listened to the messages. They tried sending emails that I deleted without opening. They were persistent. I had to give them that much. But I was more persistent. Every attempt to reach me hit an absolute wall of silence. About a month after I walked out, I got a direct message on a social media platform from a cousin I barely knew. We'd maybe exchanged 10 total words in our entire lives. But we followed each other online the way distant relatives do. His message was short and presumably well-intentioned. "Hey, not sure if you heard, but your parents are being evicted from their house. Process started a few weeks ago. Thought you should know." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me, a small part that was getting smaller every day, wanted to feel responsible, wanted to feel guilty, wanted to rush in and fix things the way I'd always tried to fix things. But that instinct was dying. Instead, I typed back a simple, "Thanks for letting me know," and then blocked him too. I didn't need updates about their situation. I didn't need the extended family grapevine keeping me informed about every development. I needed complete separation, clean and absolute and permanent. Through channels I couldn't completely block, information still trickled in over the following months. Extended family members I hadn't gotten around to blocking yet. Co-workers who knew people who knew people. The kind of small-town gossip chain that's essentially impossible to fully escape. My parents had indeed been formally served with eviction notices when they fell too far behind on rent. The financial help they'd been receiving, the $50 to maybe $100 monthly from my sisters, wasn't anywhere near enough to cover their actual expenses. They'd been falling behind on bills for months, even while believing they were being helped. When I cut off the money supply and my sisters could no longer even maintain the tiny contributions they'd been making, the whole house of cards collapsed. The legal eviction process took about 4 months from initial notice to actual removal, which I learned was pretty standard. My older sister took them in because my other sister's apartment was too small, and she was barely making her own rent. 3 adults crammed into a 1-bedroom apartment. The situation was exactly as miserable as basic physics and human psychology would predict. My parents slept on an air mattress in the living room. My older sister slept in her bedroom with the door locked, probably the only space where she could escape. 1 bathroom for 3 people. Essentially, no privacy. Constant tension over every little thing. More information came out as the months went on. My sisters, who had looked so successful on social media with their fancy dinners and new cars and weekend getaways, were not actually doing well financially at all. The reality behind the carefully curated Instagram posts was honestly grim. My older sister had been drowning in credit card debt for years, the kind that accumulates from consistently spending beyond your means and making only minimum payments. That debt was exactly why she'd jumped at the chance to pocket my money instead of passing it along. Every fancy restaurant photo I'd seen, every concert ticket she'd posted about, essentially all of it had been financed with borrowed money and stolen cash. My other sister was barely making her own bills despite having what sounded like a decent job in corporate law. Turned out she had massive student loans, a car payment she couldn't actually afford, and rent that consumed most of her paycheck before she bought a single thing. That new car I'd seen in her photos? She'd financed it with a loan that required a substantial down payment she didn't have. She had used my money for that down payment, and now she was locked into monthly payments that were genuinely breaking her financially. Without my $1,500 every month subsidizing their entire lifestyle, everything fell apart almost immediately. My oldest sister had to sell her car and downgrade to something a decade older just to make credit card minimum payments. My other sister ended up defaulting on her car loan and they repossessed it after 4 months of missed payments. They were fighting constantly, not just about money, but about absolutely everything. Whose fault was this mess? Who should have been more honest? Who should have given more money to the parents? The resentment between them grew genuinely toxic. My mother tried sending letters to my apartment. I recognized her handwriting on the envelopes and threw them away unopened, sometimes without even bringing them inside. One envelope was thin enough that I could see through it, something about "your father's health," and "please reconsider." I threw it away anyway. She tried having my father write letters, probably thinking a different handwriting would fool me. Those got exactly the same treatment. They sent packages that I refused to accept at the door, so they got returned to sender. The delivery person started to recognize me and would just shake their head sympathetically before I even opened my mouth. As for me, I got that promotion Tom had mentioned. My salary jumped to $65,000 a year within 18 months of starting. I moved into a bigger apartment with actual windows that overlooked a small park, the kind of place I had never even imagined living in. Large windows that let in natural light, high ceilings, enough space that I didn't feel cramped. I bought furniture that I actually liked, not hand-me-downs or cheap pieces from discount stores. Real furniture that would last. I started taking weekend trips by myself, trying new restaurants without checking the prices first, buying things I wanted without guilt or endless justification. I made real friends with my colleagues, people who invited me to things because they enjoyed my company, not out of pity or obligation. Started going to a gym regularly and actually enjoying it. Picked up hobbies I'd always wanted to try but never had the time or money for. Took a painting class and discovered I was absolutely terrible at it, but enjoyed the process anyway. Joined a book club. Went to concerts alone and didn't feel remotely self-conscious about it. I also started seeing a therapist, not because I was falling apart or having a breakdown, but because I wanted to understand why I'd spent 3 decades seeking approval from people who were fundamentally never going to give it. My therapist was in her 50s, calm and measured, with an office that smelled like lavender. She never pushed me toward forgiveness or reconciliation, which I genuinely appreciated. Instead, she helped me understand the patterns I'd fallen into, the ways I'd been systematically conditioned to believe I was worthless, the desperate need for validation that had driven so many of my choices. "Do you miss them?" she asked during one session, maybe 4 months into therapy. I thought about it honestly, really took time to consider the question properly. "No," I said finally. "I miss the idea of having a family. I miss what I wished they could have been. But the actual people, the ones who treated me like garbage for 30 years and then betrayed me when I tried to help? No, I don't miss them at all." She nodded slowly. That's a healthy distinction to make. Grieving the family you wish you had is very different from grieving the one you actually had. The hardest part wasn't cutting them off. The hardest part was letting go of the fantasy that had sustained me for decades. The fantasy that someday they would change. That someday they would finally see my value as a person. That if I just tried hard enough, sacrificed enough, succeeded enough, loved them enough, they would finally recognize me as worthy of their basic respect and affection. Letting go of that hope hurt more than any insult they'd ever thrown at me, more than any rejection or dismissal. But after I let it go, genuinely released it instead of just saying I had, I felt lighter. The constant background anxiety that had colored my entire life started to fade. I stopped having dreams where I was explaining myself to them, trying desperately to make them understand. I stopped composing imaginary speeches in my head about everything they'd done wrong. I stopped mentally rehearsing the perfect cutting remarks I'd deliver if I ever saw them again. I just existed without them, and it was peaceful in a way I genuinely hadn't known was possible. About 18 months after I walked out of that house, my older sister somehow managed to get my work email address. She must have called the main company line and pretended to be someone official. Or maybe she knew someone who worked there. The email was long, several paragraphs detailing everything that had happened since I left. She wrote about how difficult things had been, how living with our parents was destroying her mental health and her finances, how my other sister had lost her car and was now taking buses everywhere, how our parents were deeply depressed and struggling emotionally. She wrote about how incredibly sorry everyone was, how they had all learned their lesson about honesty and family. She mentioned vaguely that she and my other sister had supposedly paid back most of what they'd taken, though she didn't specify who they'd paid or how or provide any proof, and I suspected strongly it was a complete lie. The email ended with a direct request to talk, to meet somewhere neutral, to see if there was any possible chance of reconciliation and rebuilding what had been broken. She used words like family and healing and moving forward together. She mentioned specifically that our parents were especially desperate to reconnect, that they cried about losing me regularly, that they finally understood how much I had actually been doing for them all along. I read the email once, carefully and completely. Then I deleted it without responding. I didn't block my work email because doing so would have required explaining to IT why I needed a family member blocked from company systems, and I didn't want to involve anyone else in this mess or create that kind of workplace drama. But I never answered her. There was nothing to say. No response I could give would accomplish anything remotely positive. People sometimes asked about my family when making small talk. Coworkers getting to know me, new friends learning my background, casual conversations where family naturally came up. At first, I gave vague answers specifically designed to shut down further questions. We're not close, or it's complicated, or I don't really see them much anymore. Most people took the hint immediately and dropped it. But some pressed for more details, usually well-meaning people who simply couldn't imagine not having regular contact with family. Eventually, I started just telling the truth, or at least a version of it. I don't have any contact with them. They betrayed my trust in a fundamental way I can't get past. So I cut them off completely. That usually ended the conversation pretty definitively, though I could sometimes see judgment in certain people's eyes. That unspoken belief that family should be forgiven no matter what they do, that blood relations automatically trump all other considerations. I stopped caring what they thought. What I learned wasn't some uplifting lesson about forgiveness. It was simpler. Some relationships are toxic at their core, and no amount of effort will fix them. Some people will never see your worth. Some families are held together only by obligation. And when those bonds break, there's nothing underneath. Respect can't be earned through sacrifice. Either people respect you or they don't. My family didn't, and no amount of money was going to change that. The only thing that changed anything was me walking away. 2 years later, I moved again. Better job, better city, better life. I'm 31 now, living where nobody knows my history. I have friends who value me, colleagues who respect my work, a home that's mine. Sometimes I wonder how they're doing. Then I remind myself it's not my problem anymore. I spent 30 years trying to be enough for them. Now I'm enough for myself, and that's the only approval I need.